Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. This is the third webinar series for the ELSL, and this webinar is organized by the third year cluster. No?
So,
S- Uh, Today, we will be having landscape architect Gabi Caballero as our speaker, and uh, we usually call him Gab, and he is the current communications officer of ICOMOS Philippines. He graduated here in UP, no, sa kanyang BLA, but he finished his MA in World Heritage Sites in Brandenburg University in Germany. And he was a recipient of the Gantimpala Vanguard Award in 2017 for his works on cultural heritage conservation. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have here Mr. Gabi Caballero. Gab?
thank you very much, Vic, and everyone. I know that we did it very quickly with the arrangements of our webinar, and kumbaga, I had to use the IA presentation. I hope that everyone found it quite interesting. And I'm always very happy that once UP Diliman invites me in for these talks and speak to the students for my alma mater. So what I can do is let me go back to some of the slides or the later slides of the IA presentation, and I can explain it a little bit and maybe give you a little bit of hint on how it can be done practically. So let me share with you my slide, and feel free later on to ask me questions on the slides the things that I'll present. So let me put this in screen. Let me just check. Oh, yeah, can you see the slide?
Yes.
So in terms of protecting sites of significance, right? When you go sites of significance, it means like sites of heritage significance. We really can do much more, even though we are in COVID. So these are things that we can do. Virtual tours, virtual conversations are quite important these days. I know that still happening in different parts of the world, particularly in the Philippines. But IA does the talks, and if you can learn about sites while you're at home, why not, right? To learn about the value of different places is always a treasure, you know. Um, the stories, even though I referred to World Heritage sites, you can always go back to your towns and villages and cities and say that if you learn about the story of those places and you put that to other people, it is also an important thing because, as I said, we become vessels of significance. The smallest town or even the most obscure places are worth telling if a lot of people believe that it is important, it is worth saving. In terms of landscape architects, also when I say visit responsibly, there are things that we can do. When I said in the IA talk that if you have a day tour, right? Sometimes when you think about day tours, you go to one place. Let's say if you go to Masungi Geo Reserve, right, and enjoy your selfie moment, and then you rush back to Manila. What happens is that the only people that benefits that kind of tourism that you do is the site that you went to, when in fact a lot of like places surrounding that heritage site will also need some kind of support because the it becomes a big industry. Tourism and heritage becomes a big fuels a particular area. So if you can do overnight stays or a little explore the unexplored areas in that vicinity, do that and encourage the communities to have economic benefits as well. And the volunteering, the first picture that I showed here is about World Heritage volunteers. Now, the World Heritage volunteers is a global phenomenon that you can go to different sites. Of course, the different World Heritage sites in the Philippines may also offer this, but it doesn't need to be the World Heritage sites. I said about Ecomos Philippines providing internships, but I'm sure that there are other organizations, heritage organizations, that you can learn from and assist and learn about another side of the built environment and not just the modern ones, right? When we look at heritage, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're anti um, development. It's not the case. The heritage means that you value a certain the past, but it is up to us who are designers who can carry forward that past and integrate it to the future. So never think that the heritage industry is always about stopping things from happening. Now, as landscape architects, um, there are some heritage projects out there. I know that the Iloilo, the whole promenade was done by Paulo Alcazarin. Paco Park was done by IP Santos, and even in the beginning, Dolly Perez did the Luneta Park, and a lot of different heritage sites, or at least the beginnings of a heritage site can be tackled. Now, it's up to us to really look into uh, the significance or and see that if there are let's say older fabric or older parts of that site, we have to think first before we do anything and say that is there anything that can be saved, or what is the background, how what is the meaning of the site. The important thing for if we are developing anything, right, is to understand the meaning behind what is already out there. If it's a blank slate, there's sometimes it actually even has a meaning, even if it's a blank slate. But if it's built up, it would be good to tell that story, that there are previous peoples, previous owners, previous let's say stories that have already been told in that area. So do speak to other people who are familiar with the heritage practice, and to get some advice. Um, Later on, I will be sharing some ideas about this, the Softscape Materials in design. The idea is that if you have a site that has partly been forest, like regenerating forest, what you can also do is get the saplings and put it as part of the planting materials that you will use. So I will go through some information about that in my current project, but it is important to propagate the native plant materials. And I know that, of course, as landscape architects, we want to have the more like instant effects, right? But when you think about a 3-year or a 5-year project, there is a potential to use those ones that are a little bit smaller in terms of plants, and make them a little bit bigger. Um, but of course, you have to also convince their clients in the sustainability of such practices. Um, and the other one is about traditional and indigenous hardscape materials. So I know that in LA we do provide landscapes and hardscape details and hardscape. But have you ever thought of using more traditional techniques? If you have like yung cobblestone, for example, have you ever thought of, okay, how was the cobblestone built in the Spanish era? So you can easily do some research and say that, okay, there are what is the type of building method that was done. If you are thinking of an idea of walls, you can think about uh, being inspired by the Ifugao rice terraces as a building material. There are a lot of inspirations that we can derive from traditional knowledge, And we have to be open to the idea that it is, it is has been there for such a long time. Why don't we use it in our current practice? The idea of going to the forest is something that I've only discovered in the last couple of years, because I'm doing let's say a rainforest park. They When you go to a particular place, even if it's like the small urban park or our Sarah, and you stop and really like look at the surroundings, you tend to appreciate more of the birds, the different smaller things that are out there. A lot of people don't think about the birds that are in the parks, but when you see that there is a biodiversity even in smaller places, even in the, let's say, La Mesa Dam, and see that there is living things out there, then you get to appreciate that, hey, actually, if there are living things out there, you need to also protect it. There are ways of protecting them, and not just like disregard the whole ecosystem that is surrounding a place. Go outside of the urban areas, not just for your good time or like the adventure things that we do, but to just be simply immersed in in the forest. I know it's very very ideal. I know it seems like teka lang, there's a lot of there's nothing to see, there's nothing to do, but there is a benefit in just looking around and taking a step back, slowing yourself, so that you see a different kind of perspective. And heritage conservation seminars, what they do in IA or different places. Even Lauren Legarda has a heritage talks that she focuses um, in her Facebook page. I also saw Mamzeni quite recently in the NCCA webinar, right? We to immerse ourselves in these kinds of conversations, so we are not left unaware of the things that other people are doing. That the built environment is so dynamic. There are people who do the design, but there are people who also want to look at the the historical fabric. And we as landscape architects are equally equipped to deal with both the new and the old, but we need to know how sensitive design practices. I've told about the ICMOS IFLA um, before, but the International Federation of Landscape Architects, if once you can become a professional landscape architect, there is a potential to be joining this from the IFLA side or the ICOMOS side. It's a joint organization, and it's an international scientific committee. Now, I'm part of it, and Susan Aquino Ong is also part of it. What There are different kinds of like working groups within these scientific committee that looks at different things. For example, one of them is what you call as linking culture and nature. That kind of idea, see nature has a cultural component or culture has a natural component, is one of the things you can think about. There are also people who document 20th century landscapes. I don't know if you're aware of, there's a Facebook page that I manage with Vic is also there, and Mamzeni is the IP Santos Landscape Works. The IP Santos, as you all know, is the father of landscape architecture. And if you think about the earliest works, the grandfather of all our knowledge, and to appreciate his designs, it means that there is a starting point of a historical reference for us. There is a growth from the 1960s to now. You get to appreciate that there is a change of aesthetics. There's a change of behaviors of clients, and a change of taste. And that's something that we should really appreciate as even if it's only like the last 50 years. Now, I will end this presentation And then these are, if you're interested with World Heritage and cultural landscapes, you can go to the website of UNESCO, and it's a good resource. Yeah. Um, I will share with you. Andrea, let me just remove this, and I will share with you some Excel files that I usually look at. Yeah. Okay. Appendix 14. Okay, so one of the things that I'm looking at right now is I mentioned about forests earlier, right? So the project that I'm involved in Singapore, what we've done is that before we did work in the site, it's a regenerating non-native forest. It means that it was forest before, but there was it became a village, and then the village had to leave. And there were a lot of plants that were provided, fruit plants and whatnot. But also there are some growing native species. So what we've done is that we actually got the native species and as saplings, and then we are planting them later back to the site. Now, this is a survey of the type of national status of the saplings that we've gotten. Now, I didn't do this by myself. There are some horticulturists or um, uh, arborists that are engaged with me, environmental scientists that are, or biologists that were part of the whole team, and they helped us identify the different national status. I've even had a review of, let's say, how many are trees, the palms, the shrubs, and whatnot. And this is like the actual species, and of course, this one is the Singapore species. The Philippines will have a different kind of and conservation status will be different. And I monitor them every month for their growth and the health and the status of each of these species, and every month until and their health. You see the heights are healths are there until finally when they're ready to be planted, then I will bring them back to the site. So and they grow, they are now in this nursery, and it's good to see that even with this contribution, harvesting these saplings and bringing them back to their original place of residence is nature conservation in itself. I have another one to share with you. Give me a second. Okay. So another thing that I'm monitoring for my site, aside from the saplings, are also the trees. So going back to the overall summary, it's the same thing. I looked at the number of species that are critically endangered, to common to exotics. Exotic means that they're not invasive species. We're slowly removing the invasive species on the site, and there is an overall environmental plan that we have. And we've also discovered some extinct but presumed nationally extinct plants, trees on our site. And with the help of an arborist, we've also identified the overall structure and health of these trees that helps us to determine what are steps can be made so that they can be protected. Some of the trees in the forest are not the best of qualities because they can easily collapse, and that is being monitored. So, for example, um, I know this is a very, very specialized kind of knowledge, but let's say a tight V-shaped bifurcation with a possible included bark means that when you think about the tree, it's like it has a V shape, a tight V forking, and that's something that is quite it's quite okay. But if the fork is quite big, there's a potential for the one of the branches to fall. So this is things that we look at. and sometimes if it's a if it's a good form, then it is retained. But sometimes you can't retain some of the trees because they will fall, or like they're a danger to the public. So all this are being monitored. I monitor this together with my team, so that we create a healthy forest by the time that we complete our works. So these are tried and tested methods. This is something that is well in advance. But what I'm just saying here is that there are capacities for us to do this kind of work, to do nature conservation work uh, in relation to building sites sensitively, right? I think that is all that I wanted to share. There, of course, we can discuss about different kinds of methods that can be done in respect to landscape architecture, and how we can do heritage conservation, or at least being socially uh, aware of the works that we do as landscape architects. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gab. Okay. So may we hear the reaction from Mr. Palarca, Sir Nori? So, Sir Nori?
Okay, thank you very much, Vic. Hi, Gab. I'll call you Gab. I'll call you Gab. Okay, Gab first talked about uh, sites of heritage significance. Although I know from some of his previous work that he is an expert on World Heritage sites and concept of outstanding universal value. So, but I think he's not going into that here. I was expecting that he was going to go into that. Anyway, okay, so he is giving advice to landscape architects on how to sort of follow the trail that he has emblazoned on heritage significance. Now, I think he also talked about what to do in these times of crisis, or wherein the heritage sites that have been identified, even locally, has to be patronized so that they can survive, no? They can be sustained. But a big part because I'm now going to talk about my experience with students, no? Both undergrad and graduate students, and reflecting on Mr. Caballero's advice on how landscape architects can potentially go into heritage landscapes, cultural and historical heritage landscapes. I think what I can add probably here is that the landscape architect student or practitioner should really hone his skills on research, no? Because the information is out there, and it will take some skills, no? Because you're going to deal not only with identification of uh, systems, ecological systems. You have to deal with people. You have to deal with governments, no? And in all these cases, you have to come up with research skills, no? Probably on qualitative methods, and a lot of this will be dealing with communities, will dealing with governments, because in sites of heritage and cultural significance, in all probability, there is an organization that's already there. Like, for instance, it's in our law. For instance, protected area, protected landscapes. These are to be managed by the Protected Area Management Board, and to be provided with, and if they're covered by legislation, there's a budget for that, and they have to sort of even generate their own funds, no? But Mr. Caballero's advice, no, on how to handle landscape architects, how to handle his career or his profession, if he wants to lean towards cultural, historical, and heritage sites, there are certain requirements that has to be followed. No? And I think in one of his talks, I sort of was fortunate enough to witness some of his talks. And there's a prescription on how to do it. And there's also, I saw him mention about the Philippines having 6 of these World Heritage sites. And this is just an indication that we are culturally rich and naturally asset bountiful. So for us, for the landscape architects, those who are still at the crossroads, they can sort of follow the cue that Mr. Caballero is giving. And my phone is ringing. Okay. And sort of uh, get some more advice from him. I think he's he has sort of pioneered into this field. I don't know if there's somebody else who came before him, but I think he is making good progress in this field. And this is one field that it's a rarefied field, I think. And to develop an expertise on this and to develop uh, your capacity for even on ecological development, like what he has shown on the list of indigenous materials and softscape materials. And this is uh, this is a rich place to go into. No? This is developing the specialization and the expertise in this line of field is very promising at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Nori.
Mm.
Okay. So, Gab, you may want to react on Sir Nori
Uh,
also.
Thanks, sir. And I reiterate the same kind of sentiment. Research is very important. For landscape architects, we like designing, and I think that is a good thing to know to design. But I think as one of the things that you can specialize in is to really understand how the heritage fabric works, because well, there's not a lot of people out there who are landscape architects and also knowing the heritage fabric. I mentioned earlier Ma'am Susan Aquino Ong, who is very specialized in heritage trees. And I think one of your faculty, yung nga si Chris, is recently a member of ECOMOS as well, and Paulo Alcazarin. Paulo is very good in planning, and he does a lot of research as well for the older fabric. And this is a thing that you can think about when you move on to your career later on, and to let's say create your passion in life. Uh, to understand and to find a focus is one of the things that of us have to look into, right? So if you're passionate about heritage, you're passionate about old places, there are opportunities for learning. I think one of the things that the Bola is also doing is I've just spoken to Cecil about it, that there are potentials for specialization for landscape heritage conservation, and that will probably be rolled out in a couple of years' time, and let's see how that continues. But to know that there are places out there that we can also go to and tap into, not just the usual residential areas or malls or whatnot. If you have the courage and the passion to learn, heritage conservation is one of the things that you can go into. I also agree that there is a lot of engagements with other people in this kind of practice, because you're dealing with people, the communities, governments, government agencies that you probably have not dealt with before, NCCA, NHCP, National Museum, and they have other concerns. The DNR will also be another stakeholder for us, particularly for us for landscape architects, because they will be concerned of the natural heritage or protected areas. So as a specialization, if in the future, if you want to do that, I think there are ways. And I think in the future, there are also in the works of ICOMOS and Pala to collaborate and give some talks about this. I think a couple of years ago, I did a talk for Pala. It was fun. Actually, it was a design esquisse kind of workshop that we did. San Sebastian, how to design for San Sebastian, and I gave some ideas on how it can be done, and then everyone went to groups and then did some sketches. And Paolo and I were saying, okay, how do you do this? What are the considerations and whatnot? It's another. We also did that in USC, in the San Carlos University, and together with another colleague, Carmen Solis, who's an architect and ICOMOS member in Cebu. So ano lang yan, training. Don't worry about it. There is a potential for doing it, and open-mindedness is the key to heritage conservation.
Thank you, Gab, no? With regards to research, siguro nagsasawa na yung mga estudyante natin kaka-research, no? Handa na sila kumbaga, no? Okay, the background has been there. It's been laid na, no? Okay, especially on our grad students, which is very much research focused. And
Yeah,
some of our grad students already signified interest on heritage conservation to with what do you call that, with focus on landscape actually.
yeah,
Okay, there are questions from our students, so I would like to turn you over to AJ Rosell. She will be handling the Q&A portion. Okay, AJ.
Hi, Gab. Thank you for your insights. We have a few questions here. Um, what are some strategies that we as designers can employ to encourage active participation and immersion in heritage sites?
okay. So one of the things that you can do as strategies, right? So once you get the site, and let's say the site development plan or the base plan, as I would call it, is that you when you do your site analysis and inventory, then see first, oh, okay, is there something old or something that is worth checking? You can do historical checks as well, if you think that it is quite old. And I did a talk recently about this, saying, let's say Google Scholar. So you just type the site, and then maybe in Google Scholar it will appear. There are some times that you can go to the National Archives to see if there are older plans, and then start from there. And then also you can look at the internet if there are pictures that are available, and then that is the starting point of, like, let's say, piecing together the past. It's like a treasure hunt, get all this different information. You can also start talking to the owners, and you can ask them, oh, okay, is there a story behind what you're seeing? Let's say if there's a well, is there a story behind the well? Is there a story behind the things that you want me to integrate? I think you have to be inquisitive of the background, and that's the first strategy. Once you know the background, and let's say the owner says, I really really like this well, and I want to preserve it, then you start thinking, okay, how do you preserve it, and how do you put it as part of that narrative, or that design that you're doing, that the client becomes happy and say that you have integrated the story that he wants you to have in that landscape. So background and knowledge is quite good. So I think that's the first step.
Hello.
Um,
Yeah, AJ. Yes.
I think he got disconnected.
I did.
Hindi naman, nandun siya.
Okay. Another question is to the Excel file earlier.
Yes.
How do you monitor the botanical species in that site? Is
Okay.
it through remote sensing or actual on-site observation?
Okay. So thanks for the question. So there are two ways. So the first one, we hired a team, an environmental team, and this is very specialized because this had an EIA, and there's an environmental management team who actually looks into this. So first they do the drones and they did the surveys, and also they did a plant identification on site. So that is when they took over the site. They what the first things that was done is to really tag all the trees and all the plant materials. It took like 3 or 4 months to do that, and then we did a research on the conservation status. The research of conservation status in Singapore, it's a little bit easier because the databases are out there when it's in the National Parks Board. So you can identify the plants that and their status. When you go to DNR or maybe to do your research, there are different sites that are identified with vascular plants of the area. So just Google vascular plants of the region, and then a list can come out. Hopefully, I don't know in the Philippines if it actually happens like that, but you might need to go to DNR and see, let's say in one area or one region or one protected area, what are the existing vascular plants, and then you start looking at the, let's say, what we call as the IUCN Red List or IUCN Global Conservation List if there are no local conservation status. Yeah, so there are methods. Kaya lang, syempre, you need to look at it as a scientific method as well. That sometimes, let's say, I don't know, let's say one example, ilang ilang, right? Ilang ilang is a native plant, but do we actually know its conservation status? And where is it published? So these are things that I think we need to start finding the information for. Unfortunately, I don't have that idea for the Philippines, but it's a question to ask as well.
Well, in terms of plant conservation, we have what you call different groups din naman, no? Uh, we have native plants, native trees society, and other scientific groups na deals with such things, no? The problem is that they just deal on a particular subject, but walang connections dun sa ibang area. Say, how do you connect this to heritage? How do you connect this to the overall landscape? So I think that's where we landscape architects will come in. No.
Yeah, correct. So let's say if you find a picture, a tree on site, and you don't know, then you take a photo and give it to this to the society, and then they can identify for you, and maybe you can ask what is their conservation status, and then when you find out that they're critically endangered or extinct in the wild, then of course you have to say that, hey, hold on, kahit na it's not the nicest tree that looks there, but if it's nationally extinct, right, and then you need to think about, hey, we need to probably protect this because, well, if you remove the tree, then it will be gone. These are things that it's part of the consciousness as we should think about.
There's another question here. As cultural landscapes are often interchanged with other related terms, how would you differentiate cultural landscapes from historic landscapes?
Okay, cultural landscapes is a bigger, let's say, umbrella of what you call as a in relationship of landscapes or like places and people and the nature. So it is three types of landscapes, and one of them is the historic landscapes as well. The built by specifically built by people. In Europe, right? They have this what they call as historic gardens, Versailles or the um, let's say Baroque gardens, or I think you know that from your LA history, right? So historic gardens are different. Now, are a subset of cultural landscapes, rather. There's another term. I'm not sure if the person who's asking is referring to historic urban landscapes, which is a type of recommendation that is stating that the urban fabric has its own history, and it needs to grow. It needs to be an amoeba that is allowed to like change over time. Now, I'm not sure if that's what this person is asking, but they are different kinds of subsets, and the biggest one is what you call as the cultural landscape. What I've asked Vic to do as well is maybe you can do the research of this term cultural landscape, and the official let's say terminology is in the UNESCO website, and you can see what they are, and maybe this will allow you to a little bit further understand these concepts.
Okay. The questions are coming in. We have three more. In reference to your IA talk, are the voices of IP communities integrated in the system UNESCO uses in listing qualifying World Heritage sites,
Okay.
particularly those communities trying to enlist cultural landscapes?
Okay, very good question. The 1972 UNESCO World Heritage Convention recognizes countries. So they are the 21 voices, or the 21 states are the people who are recognized. Now there is a forum in this meeting that has um, indigenous peoples or groups, or any type of NGO can be part of the meetings. But in the procedures of the World Heritage Convention, they have to ask to be heard by the 21 states. It's actually very, very bureaucratic system, but they can be heard. But if they are, let's say they talk to one country, and then the one country says, okay, please let this group be heard. I know it's a little bit archaic in that sense, but there are the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention, which is another convention, is focusing on in the people and communities. So it is if you talk about, let's say, traditional culture, traditional life, and practices, they are covered in UNESCO in another convention. Um, which is related to their practices and not necessarily the sites. Yeah, so two different things.
Okay. And a student is asking if, do you have any tips for landscape architecture students who have to conduct their research or thesis indoors?
Okay.
Kasi we're not allowed to do site visits.
So let me tell you a personal thing that I did. When I was studying in Germany, and one of the things that was required of us is to pick a site in our country and then do a research and do what we call as a World Heritage nomination. And I was in Germany, and I cannot go back to the Philippines at the time. So what I did was that I had to do online research and speak to people who are in the heritage industry, and speak, email the National Museum, the National NCCA, NHCP. I had to do all that, and by Facebook and by email. My colleague here, Kenneth, is also doing the same thing. He's researching something for ICMOS, and he's just doing it online. All things are online. Now, but what you need to do is verify the resource. So it cannot be like hearsay or like fake news, right? So you have to go to reputable sources. that tells the right information. Now, if I'm not sure with regards to Google, um, how advanced is Google Maps in the Philippines, but there are some data that you can go for Google Maps, and if some people might take photos of sites like selfies with in the background of something or YouTube videos. I actually use that as well. So just to get a feel of the site, you have to be creative and see how you can do your research online without even going to the site. Um, yeah, unfortunately, we are at times of COVID, and that we have to do the best that we can.
Okay. I have last two questions. Assuming the endangered species is located in a project site slated for development of a BPO or hotel or residential tower, how would you have the client change or even consider protecting that particular species?
Good question. So first of all, when you do the site analysis and inventory, right? So you first have to know the status, right? So once you found out, then the burden is in you to say that okay, this is the different status of the conservation status of the plants. And one way of doing it is that um, if the saplings or the trees are small enough, they can be gotten by a landscape contractor, rebagged, and put back to their nursery first. It's like, but you need to build it into the contract or to allow that potential of the contractor doing that, so that he knows that, let's say, I need 500 saplings to be in your nursery for 1 year, and then we want to replant that. So, but to convince the client, you have to tell him that it is environmentally sensitive. If if it's not, if he doesn't have an EIA, you need to have your powers of persuasion as a landscape architect, and definitely there are things that we can push, and sometimes if no one hears you, it's also very, very frustrating, right? So it you need to hone that conversation skills. I know Mam Zeni told us in a couple of years ago when I was a student that you need to know how to present. You need to present your argument. You need to know how to say that this is very, very important. And similar to your design, you can just say, I think that this is important. We should do it, and that is a professional stance. Yeah. So if it doesn't happen, you put your professional stance. A, this is the best thing that you can do in your site. It is good for the environment. It is good for you. It is good for the earth.
Here's a question from the YouTube Live. Do you think our knowledge and contribution in heritage sites could be used in designing other places, like commercials and residential spaces? If so, how could we use this to design such spaces?
Okay. So when you look at the new builds, right? So you want to think about how heritage can be put there, right? So think about the brief first of the client, right? So what does he want to have? Does he want to have a nature-based or a heritage-based kind of idea? Does he want to have this kind of referential to something that is from the past? So if you think that it is part of that brief, if he says that he wants modern, right? It's very hard, right? But you can still integrate some things. For example, the type of material that you use is of a certain from a particular time frame. Yeah. But you need to know, let's say, how to sensitively use the material, right? So let's say I know that we like Araal stone, right? So if you say Araal stone at the and it had a certain kind of patterning in a certain time of era. So you want to say, I want to do a 1970s kind of look, and then you have to convince that you say, okay, this 1970s look is nice because of dot. You can do references to particular time frames, so that it tells a story. And I've done a project actually in the Philippines, design, and it happened in time of COVID. Unfortunately, we haven't built it yet. I made reference to the rice terraces because he had a site that was undulating, and the techniques of the material that we are using. I said that why don't we use the walls that you have on your site? Sorry, the boulders or the stones that you have on site, and create it as part of the built fabric, right? So you tell that story of the site in a different way, and then he has a terraced effect that looks like the rice terraces, although it's referential, but there is a story behind it, and then he can tell that story as well. So there's storytelling that is done. There's also research that needs to be done, and what is appropriate for the site. You need to think about that as well. If you want the rice terraces in, I don't know, in a flat site, you can't really do that, right? So you need to learn about the site and what is the interpretation that you want to have.
Okay. I think we have time for one last question from our student. She says, recently there are threats of demolitions to some of our local heritage sites. Where does your group specifically stand in issues like this? What do you do besides acknowledging World Heritage sites?
Okay, so the Ecomos is actually a Ecomos Philippines is a very diverse groups. My specialization is in World Heritage, but there are other people who specializes in other things, archaeology or architecture, modern architecture. Very diverse people. Now, for particular situations, like let's say the Binondo Bridge, that was something that our organization in Ecomos had a stance, a group stance on what needs to be done. We also did a recent conversation on the film life and how can the film life building be better protected or integrated with SM. It's not everything, not everything we have a stance on, but for big issues or things that is really important for us, then that's something that we collaboratively discuss and see what is a is a group stance. Everyone will have their own perspectives on the matter. Sometimes people don't care about it so much. Sometimes you care, but as um, Professor Palarca was saying earlier, that there is a need to have conversations. Why are things important, and why was one person value one and the other doesn't value so much? So yeah, so there is a organizational stance, but that's always negotiated.
Thank you very much, Gab. I think there are more questions coming in, but we're running out of time. Medyo limited lang kasi tayo yung time natin. But what we will do is that we will collate all the questions na hindi nasagot or natanong kay Gab, and then we will send it to him. Then hopefully he will answer back. Okay. And to end this webinar, Sir Nori will be tying everything up, what has been presented. Okay, Sir Nori, the floor is yours. Sir, nakamute ka, sir.
Oo nga. Napansin ko rin. Okay, thank you very much, Vic, and thank you very much, Gabi. It was a very helpful and insightful presentation that you did. And I think this is well appreciated by the students, no? Especially those whom I said earlier, who are still at the crossroads. Because this is an option that you have presented, aside from thinking that landscape architecture is doing everything beautiful. No? So we have a lot of options. There are other options actually, and this type of deliberations, discussions would open those minds or those still confused minds of some of the students. I'm teaching first year and I'm teaching at the master level, no? So I can see how well they are dispersed. So I think focusing on heritage, heritage sites, heritage conservation is one concrete and very promising area because what the UNESCO and the World Heritage Committee has done for the six heritage sites in the Philippines is worthwhile looking at. And I will entertain some development of case studies along these heritage sites, no? Because what we are going to be able to really understand is the process, no? The identification, they're everywhere. They're all there, no? But how do you now develop? How do you now apply the process that is being prescribed by these international agencies? No? But going back to what you have said earlier, no? uh, there are ways wherein we can adapt or practice or start developing in ourselves this this liking for heritage conservation and cultural and heritage sites. No, uh, I'm teaching, for instance, open spaces, and there are a lot of open spaces that would probably fall under some of the categories enumerated in by UNESCO. So I think Mr. Caballero has opened a new door for landscape architecture students, and these types of talks, no, the one wherein we are going to be given new information, a new promise, a new opportunity, I mean, it's worthwhile pursuing. So this type of interaction with Mr. Caballero and his other specialists and experts, no, should be continued. I think that's although the question and answers were ably answered by Mr. Caballero. I mean, the other questions that were submitted uh, were not aired. No, so it's I think Vic, you should have a part two for this.
Yes, sir. Kulang yung 1 hour but we are only limited sa 1 hour kasi. Anyway, what we will do is that we'll try to squeeze in sa ating webinar series if we have another part 2 on this. But we will send the other questions that were that were given, no, to you, Gabi, and maybe siguro kahit isang class, yung third year class or any class that is interested into heritage conservation, pwede nating yung class na lang na yon, and we can invite others that are interested. Maybe we cannot, hindi kailangan sa webinar series but in a particular class. Di ba, Ma'am Z, tulad nung class mo sa PropRap?
Actually, ang class namin hanggang 2:30.
Ah.
Kung meron pa, pwede yun. Pwede pa.
Di ba tayo pagagalitan ng university niyan?
Kaya naman kay Gabi.
So pwede pa magtanong, Gab?
Kaya lang may meeting na ako.
Okay, yun lang. Okay. Yes, sir.
Vic,
Yes, sir.
Siguro i-recommend ko for the next webinar, we focus on the process. On the process of identification, developing, and inscribing nung heritage.
First year cluster yung webinar, sir. Yung para kay Gabi. Yes.
Yung para
yes,
kay Gabi, yung para kay Gabi na kuan. Kasi I really got interested nung mabasa ko yung mga, nung nakita ko yung mga other trabaho niya. These are specific areas and very few are into this, no? Am I right, Gabi?
Yeah, so it is quite a small group, particularly if you think about landscape architects. We're only, I don't know, now last time when I was registered 200 lang, but now how many LAs are there? 500 or
yeah, 500.
Less than 500.
Okay, so it's still a very for landscape architects in the Philippines. I think it's a very very small count, but some people do research. So I know that Ma'am Zenny, Kate Nadal, has been researching on cultural landscapes on the Ifugao rice terraces. I think there was one presentation in Amherst that there was a presentation about the open spaces of plazas in the
Yes.
historic towns. That was like, I thought that was amazing as well. It's not just me does this. There are other people as well who
Yeah.
think about these things, and maybe we can also do share what other people have learned in the practical sense and research locally on these things. I think we should come together to share ideas like this.
Actually, Gab, the environmental studio, the environmental landscape studio is into that already.
Great.
Kahit undergrad and grad, sinasama na namin sila sa mga fields, no? Sa mga field trips and yung mga studies na yon. So, medyo ano na, it has come a long way from our college days. I might say, no?
Mm.
So ibang iba na yung yung approach din natin sa sa akad. Okay? So, I think that's it. And we want to thank you, Gab. So, alam mo na, may second part to, ha?
I hope it's not too busy.
Yeah.
Um,
November ka mo. November ka na malilibre ulit. So,
yes.
that's how busy our speaker is. So,
Yeah.
we would like to thank you. So, class, let's give Gab one big clap, di ba? Yan. Thank you very much, Gab. And before we go, may we ask everybody to turn on their